because we have a really fantastic guest. So Dr. Joanna Fortune is with us.
Hello.
Yeah, we're very excited to have her. So if you haven't already come across her work, I might tell you a little bit about her.
hmm
So she's an accredited psychotherapist specializing in the parent-child relationship, as well as an expert in the areas of trauma and attachment. So she's the author of the best-selling 15-minute parenting series of books and her fourth book, Why We Play. So Joanna is the host of her own 15-minute parenting podcast and founded the Solive Parent-Child Relationship Clinic in
Yes.
Dublin in 2010. So we got it. So in addition to her clinical work, Joanna is a widely sought after supervisor, trainer, and conference speaker. So not only has she delivered her own TEDx talk, but she also writes a weekly parenting column in the Irish Examiner and is the parenting consultant on the weekly parenting slot on News Talks Moncrief for over 4 years. So Joanna is a regular media contributor to a variety of radio and TV shows, and she generously shares her knowledge and expertise through a number of mediums, including appearing as a guest on podcasts. So you're very welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's always kind of surreal having your bio read back to you. You're like, oh my God.
Yeah, you're very accomplished. There's a lot on there.
Well, I'm a long time in this field, actually. I was thinking about that ahead of talking to you today. It's a long time, so you do clock up some experience across those years.
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting. And I suppose we were talking about what kind of questions and what types of things we might want to ask you about. And it would be so great if you could just tell us a little bit
Mm.
about how you started off. How did you get involved in psychotherapy in the first place? What brought you to it?
Yeah, I actually studied psychoanalysis straight from school. Actually, I always had a particular interest in psychotherapy, but psychoanalysis in particular.
Mm,
And at the time, there was an undergraduate degree course in psychoanalysis and is in what's now DBS College. And there would
mhm.
have been a lot of involvement with the School of Psychotherapy in St. Vincent's Hospital as well in Elm Park. And that was a 3-year undergraduate, but with, the option, and really, if you were going to practice, the expectation you would also do the 2-year master's program afterwards. So it was really a 5-year training at that stage. So I went in straight from school to that training and I
Wow.
loved it. Yeah, I loved it. My master's was a clinical placement based master's as well. So I had, lectures and whatnot, and a 2-year infant observation program, and then clinical rotations across a number of psychotherapeutic settings over
Yeah.
those 2 years. And that's really where I was like, I really am interested in this, and this is interesting. But I
Mm,
really found my space, I guess, within working with children and adolescents and also their parents or caregivers, whomever they might be.
mhm.
And I really enjoyed that work. So that's where I really sought to pursue further work and opportunities. And after my master's, that's what I went on to do work-wise.
Yeah. So you knew very soon that you were interested in this as a profession.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
And, I remember being quite a precocious teenager as well myself. And I stumbled across a copy of Freud's introductory lectures in a secondhand bookshop, and I bought it and didn't understand a single word of it. But was not a word, of course. I could have done my whole undergrad and still gone, what was that about? But I did know that I'd like to understand it, and it was interesting. So I held on to that. I still have it somewhere here on one of the shelves. I still have that old battered
Yeah.
copy. Yeah.
So it's really inspirational for you. And then I suppose, your work from going into psychotherapy or psychoanalysis and then working with children and parents, how did you then maneuver into, I suppose, play? I guess the way that I
Yeah.
would know of you is through
Mm,
Theraplay.
of course. Yeah.
And yeah, and it's so fascinating. I'm just curious, how did you find yourself in that direction?
Well, a lot of my psychoanalytic training while the school of thought, that my undergrad was immersed in, was very much Freudian, Lacanian psychoanalysis. Because of my particular interest in working with children, with adolescents, with parents, I would have been, also pursuing down the road of object relations theory and Donald Winnicott and Manny Klein and whoever else around that. And so play is integral to the work of Winnicott, whether you're working with adults or you're working with children. And a lot of that really resonated with me, that the therapeutic space in and of itself is at its essence a play space. And I don't mean that you're always taking out your building blocks and your finger paints.
Yeah.
That's one form of play, but really approaching it with that playful state of mind and a playful way of being, and thinking of that interplay and interchange between you in a playful way. And I really liked that. And, that was something I hung on to. So I would think a lot of my interest in play, and particularly that playful state of mind, stems from the psychoanalytic training I had. But I did take a postgraduate course in practice-based play therapy, it would have been called at the time, and it was a postgraduate for people who had already trained, say, in psychotherapy. And I did that as well, which was much more, representational play and specific mediums of play-based therapy. And I worked with a lot of that for years. I worked in very specific trauma areas. I worked
Mm.
a lot in the NGO sector. And, I had so much exposure to a wide variety of things. I did a lot of attachment courses, training
Mm.
as well with Anna Freud Center around then.
Yes. Yeah.
And then, I also worked in orphanages overseas with a charity here in Ireland who was doing that. So a lot of that was about psychological resilience, deinstitutionalization, and, life skills work as well. So there was a lot of broad experience, and I really was in pursuit of that, to be honest, to see where could I apply this
Hmm.
and what would work. And I really enjoyed all of that. But it was when I began to work for myself, I set up Solid Parent-Child Relationship Clinic in 2010.
Yep.
And, just as the economy's crashing, I decided that's a great time to
Perfect.
go
Yeah.
into business for yourself. But, it was because I figured the NGO sector, and, it's quite a humbling experience fundraising for your own job, and realizing that, we looked at it, myself, the charity founder, the board of directors, and the reality was they really couldn't afford my role anymore. So it was about
Mm.
writing a strategic plan for the charity to sustain in the absence of that role, and what else could be done, and a very robust charity. So we looked at that very mindfully. And, I went to work for myself, and I don't regret it. I've loved all of the adventures and experiences I've had in employment, but I love being self-employed. I love working for myself. And that was really when I began to discover Theraplay as well as a particular
Mm.
modality. Because parent-child relationship clinic is what I was setting up, and I really wanted to explore specific therapeutic means of bringing the caregiver-child relationship into, not just into the room, but as the central focus of the work.
Yeah.
And Theraplay is, as one dyadic modality, is such a great way to do that. But it
Yeah.
was very hard to get. Theraplay was very new in Ireland.
Yes.
So I had done a lot of research and looking into it, and I got to do my level 1 in Ireland, but I traveled to the States to do my level 2.
Hmm.
And the person who delivered that became my clinical supervisor. And I mean, I really credit my clinical supervision in Theraplay with how quick I was to integrate it into my practice, because I didn't have colleagues or peers that were also doing it.
Hmm.
And, that's something in my role now in driving Theraplay Ireland that I'm very keen to build, is a sense of community and connection, so that you can bounce ideas and experiences and the trials and tribulations of it all with somebody who's on that journey with you, because it was quite an empty space at the time. But I loved it, and I found a real rhythm in my
Mm.
practice and within my broader therapeutic modality for Theraplay. I thought Theraplay really resonated well with
Yeah.
psychoanalysis, with object relations theory, with play-based practice. It just really, for me, made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Mm. I'm wondering, Joanna, would you mind telling us a bit more? Well, telling me, I think, a bit more
Mm.
about Theraplay, because I think I'm probably the person who knows least about it.
So
Amongst
far.
us three. Yeah.
Yeah, Theraplay is a dyadic psychotherapy, so it's play-based. It means that the adult and the child in the caregiving relationship are in the room together. So it's not like you are focusing on the child as your primary client, or even their parent, but moreover their relationship with each other. And the aim of the treatment process is to strengthen and enhance the emotional quality, the connection between caregiver and child. And that's what you're focusing on. So it always begins in it's a very structured modality, actually, and structure in its truest sense, not rules-based or rigid, but very flexible and adaptable. And I think that is shown in that no two Theraplay treatments are going to look or feel exactly the same, because it's very much about making it fit the presentation of the dyad. And that could be within one family, by the way. You could have one parent who comes with a child and another, and you'll have different priorities and different areas of the relationship that you're working on, which is quite normal and makes total sense when you think we all have different relationships with our parents and caregivers growing up. So it's done through, you always start with a, clinical intake meeting. And then there is an assessment process, which is called the MIM, the Marshak Interaction Method, which is exclusive to Theraplay. And you do your MIM assessment, which allows you to identify where there are already strengths in this relationship that you're going to amplify and lean into, and what areas specifically would benefit from some support, some investment, and some focused work. And then you build your treatment protocol around that. And the way we work, because the relationship with the adult is so important, is we'll do some work with parent and child in the room, but every so many sessions, depending on the family situation, it could be every 3 to 5 sessions, you're sitting and doing a psychoeducation review with parents. So you do some reflection. It's a video-based intervention, so you're doing some reflection on some video clips, but also blending in some of that very much attachment, trauma where relevant, but also just psychoeducation around typical child development, so that we're creating that, increasing the parent's capacity or caregiver's capacity for mentalization, on that basis of, one of the greatest efforts we can make to prevent psychopathology emerging in children is to invest in their parents, their caregivers. And I think that's something that's really at the core of Theraplay as a modality.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking to what you were saying about when you first discovered kind of Theraplay and became trained in Theraplay, and how you were maybe one of the few, if not the only person in Ireland who's kind of exploring that. How has it been to try and bring that to Ireland and to, have clinicians take that on board? Are people open to that? Are they excited about Theraplay?
Yes, I mean, and at the time when I was training, I was aware Christine Hennessy, who has since sadly passed away, but was with Bernardo's, was also immersed in Theraplay practice and would have been driving that within Bernardo's adoption service. And, but she was working within Bernardo's. So I'm somebody in private practice. And then what was very obvious was there was a heightened level of awareness about Theraplay in Ireland's adoption community. Foreign adoption community, and very quickly within our care system. So where we see evidence of ruptured attachment or some trauma presentation, and and maybe because speakers had come to Ireland, people like Dan Hughes or whoever, speaking about these topics and mentioning things like DDP, developmental dyadic psychotherapy, and Theraplay, and putting that idea in people, I really want this, I want to be able to access it. So quite quickly, word is out, there's somebody practicing this. And I felt that, that weight of demand very quickly. And again, I would say if it wasn't for clinical supervision, it would have been really easy to become overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And, I really wanted to authentically move through my certification process and be very true to where am I at with this process and so it was a part of my clinical practice, but not all of it. I was still doing psychotherapy work. I was still doing other types of work within my practice, and I think it was important for me to keep that balance. I still find that, to be honest with you. And when I was moving through the certification process with Theraplay, and then I moved on to become a trainer and a supervisor, and I was, having the opportunity to shadow trainers and supervisors and learn through that, I really saw the value in developing a hub within Ireland of people who are not only trained, because I think it's one thing to take a training, it's quite another to integrate it into your practice, even if that doesn't mean you're pursuing certification, but to
Yeah.
simply seek to implement it and the ideals beyond the training, and to find a space that would enable people to do that. And that meant creating one. So with Theraplay Ireland, that's what we've been really doing, is creating a space where anyone who's trained, we do special interest groups on a quarterly basis. The long-awaited website will be coming very soon. There were other things that needed to fall into place for that to happen. And, you know, to represent Theraplay Ireland on a global stage is also very important. And some of the exciting things that people are doing with Theraplay here in Ireland.
Yeah. I'm wondering, how long has it been since you would have maybe introduced that in Theraplay Ireland? I know with other colleagues as well. How long has it been maybe, operating in Ireland?
So I took my Theraplay training, I want to say 12, 13 years ago, maybe something around then.
Nice.
And then there was a process in terms of Theraplay Ireland is part of the global Theraplay community. So while it's our own group, we are part of the Theraplay global
Yeah.
community. And really developing that came after I was a trainer and supervisor, because we were able to drive our own trainings in Ireland rather than bringing trainers in to do it. And I think that's something that's been replicated in lots of other countries, where, you know, really building that there's a point of contact, but growing that team. And that's, you know, when you're starting off with people just taking level 1 trainings, it takes a while to get people to a stage of, you know, would you like to be a trainer? And not everybody would does, you know? And would you like to be a supervisor? And maybe not. And approaching it that way. So we're getting there, and we're growing all of the time. And there's increasing numbers of certified practitioners at many levels, because that's one of the things the model offers, of course, is that you can certify at a foundational level, intermediate level, or full therapeutic certification level. So, you know, we're really encouraging people to do that, as you know.
How
Join up.
how long does it take, you know, like from like the start to like, you know, you're kind of not finished. I know you're never finished.
Never
Like, you know,
finished.
like you know, to get to move through those levels, like, is it, you know, a decade, or is it kind of
But you
like
know, it really
you,
is up to the individual, because Theraplay isn't a core training. You know, everybody coming to this already has a clinical background, you know, is already, you know, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, a play therapist, whatever it is. They're already bringing that with them. That we see Theraplay as a development training, an add-on training, and it's still a clinical modality. So the certification process is tiered to allow people to say, well, I really want to formalize the training that I've done and make sure I'm implementing it correctly. And I want this level of certification, but it's not pertinent to my practice to pursue it beyond that, or people who do want to. So it's very much an adaptable process. Some people come, I would say most people, once they enter the practicum, do supervision once a month. And I think sometimes that's in our psyche from other trainings we've had, where your supervision requirement is monthly. So I think that creeps in, but we don't put that on people. So it depends on the pace you're working at. You will need to see a minimum number of families, do a minimum number of hours, and have a minimum number of those sessions supervised. I say minimum because, you know, some people will want to do a little more, or to focus on a particular aspect of the model over that. Some people will get through the entire process, that is foundational, intermediate, and full, in 18 months to 2 years. And some people will take 3 to 5 years to do that. It really is up to you.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask as well, like, is it, you know, like, so it's that kind of dyad, so it's like parent and child. Is there like, is there ever kind of the case that it's the, you know, the two parents, or is there ever more people than that in the room, or like, can you run it as a group, or is
You
that
can. No, you're absolutely right. So, I mean, it is caregiver child. And if in a family, both caregivers, if there are two, are attending, they will still have separate processes within that family. So it might be that, you know, one caregiver comes one week and the other comes the next week, and you do a week on, week off. It depends on the presentation. It may be that you do two slightly shorter, but 2 sessions a week on, say, a Tuesday and a Thursday, and you see them weekly. It really depends on family formation, on family dynamics, and what has come up in the assessment protocol, which is so important in helping you paint that picture. And that's what we call the dyadic model. But there is group Theraplay, and there are a couple of adaptations of that as well. So in school environments, there's a specific modality we call sunshine circles, which, you know, is really aimed at teachers and classroom assistants who might train in running Theraplay groups in the classroom. So with those numbers and using it to help ease the challenges around transitions, you know, for children between activities, or from indoors to outdoors, outdoors back to indoors, and to manage maybe morning time and evening and bookend the day. And there's some beautiful work, and particularly nurture groups that can go on in schools around that. And we then have more general group Theraplay, which can be run as what I'd call an open-ended group or a universal group. So for example, if I'm running a universal group, I run a group Theraplay session every Tuesday at 2:30, and whoever in the community or wherever I'm hosting that is welcome to come. It's a universal play group where everybody can benefit from more play experience, but it's not targeting any specific behavior, specific issues. It's a general play experience. And then above that, you'd have what we call targeted group work, where you do have a focus in your group. You do have a specific issue you're working on, or you may have in a school system where you have 1 or 2 children who have been identified as would benefit from this work. And you might blend them in with more so-called typically developing peers so that they co-regulate within the group together. And I might run that in a very specific way for, let's say, 8 weeks, and there will be 6 children in that group, and they will be the same 6, give or take, every single week. So that's what we would call targeted group, where I'm either targeting an issue that the group share, or really using positive peer interaction as a co-regulation experience for some children. But that's very much a selected group, and it's not for anyone who happens to be free to come. There's a clear beginning, middle, and end. And we do have, you know, some group monitoring forms to track progress over the course of group, so you can see very clearly where we started from, where we're ending at, and have I addressed my therapeutic goals in this group. So yeah, group Theraplay is a great way to do that.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of different, you know, ways and benefits of kind of implementing Theraplay. And I know you were mentioning there that all the clinicians who do the training, they already have had training. You know, they're qualified,
Yes.
they come in and they do this as an add-on. And I'm wondering because, you know, I think all of us have heard of Theraplay, but then going in and actually doing the training, it's such a different way of working. It's so, I mean, it's play, you know, and it's just so fascinating. And I'm just curious, when professionals come in, you know, at the start of the training versus the end, do you see a difference? Or people, you know, how do they adapt that? And I suppose from a psychology standpoint, maybe you wouldn't have a huge amount of play in the types of work that you're doing. So how do you see people kind of taking that on, or the reaction to that from professionals?
I always feel grateful. It's a 4-day training. It's 26 hours over 4 days, because if I let everybody go at day 1, I'm not sure they would just come back or I'd ever hear from them again. I think the first day is that, oh my goodness, this is really, and I say at the beginning, you know, this is going to call upon us all to engage in a shift in our modalities. This is different to the way you've been, whatever you've been working, this is different to the way you've been working. And just allow that kind of discomfort and resistance to come up, and we'll work through it over the days we're together. But that first day can be really activating for everybody. And you know what? It's supposed to be, because that's something we can underestimate with this work. And I've heard this said about Theraplay, oh, it's just blowing bubbles and singing songs. And I'm like, well, you know, if you're just blowing bubbles, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that's what you're doing. That's not therapy. That's blowing bubbles, and that's fun, and everybody's going to enjoy that, and great. But in Theraplay, we would call upon you to know, what dimension does bubble blowing fall into? How are you doing it? And why with this child at this session and this stage of treatment? It's very mindfully selected play. It's not just play for play's sake, which again is perfectly lovely. This is a much more focused way of working, and it differs from other play-based modalities in that while we are child focused, We are therapist-led, practitioner-led. You know, we're not saying, would you like to, and how is this for you? We're doing. And it's not that we don't care, we're ignoring somebody's reaction to that. It's that we're reading somebody's reaction and we are responding in the play by doing, so that the dyad in front of you doesn't need to say, hey, I don't like this, because I'll notice your shoulders, your elbows, I'll notice you don't like it and I will respond, and you will have that sense of getting gotten. But one of the key things that happens in our way of working is, in the session, I have the child's attachment system, I have their caregiver's attachment system, and I have my own, and we're all activated. And so it is a lot of work at staying regulated myself, or aware of my dysregulation. Where am I at in my nervous system? Keeping an eye on everyone else and trying to co-regulate what's happening in the room. So that also happens on the training. So, you know, you're literally dropped in. I think the first thing we do is play. And then it's, by the way, here's my name. And then we move on and you get to see the first 8 or 9 minutes of a classic session. And that's partly to bring up that activation. So we're like, okay, what are we holding? Where are we at? Where is the resistance? And what strikes you as most different to how you're currently working? And I think that's a really helpful way to do it, because it brings us into that place of not just thinking, oh, yes, I know what you mean when you say my attachment system will be activated, and I could write you an essay on that and speak very coherently about it. You're feeling it. It's happening. And so we very much want to mind ourselves and each other in the training too, because we are calling on our own autonomic nervous system arousal, our own capacity for regulation, and our self and other awareness, our capacity for mentalization. It's all activated at once. And that's your toolkit. Way before, you know, because Theraplay isn't, you know, your classic play-based room where you have lots of lovely things and miniatures and it's beautiful. You know, we use toilet roll and tinfoil and lotion and cotton balls. It's basic household type of supplies that you're using, because actually you are the toolkit. And it takes us 4 days to really get there. It takes us the full 26 hours before people are like, okay, I've run the gauntlet on this training. And you know what, like any training, sometimes the learning is, this isn't for me. And you've learned, and sometimes people complete the training and say, this has been really interesting. And I've gained some insight, but I don't think this modality is for me, or I'm not going to use it in this way. And that's okay. We have a whole section we do on implementation for how might you embed the practices and principles of the modality if you're not running full protocol. So I think there's lots of ways that it can strengthen and enhance our practices, whatever that might be, based on our various orientations. And it always makes for an interesting group when we've got a wide variety of professional backgrounds and practices in the room. I think that's part of what I enjoy most, is the different perspectives people bring.
Yeah. Or maybe different levels of experience and familiarity with play kind of working or interventions. And yet it's something that we all did naturally growing up. Just nobody has to maybe teach you fully how to play. But then I suppose as adults, we've maybe lost a little bit of that.
Well, I mean, I think so. And that's literally the 4th book I wrote is all about that, because that comes up so much, is that in professionals as much as the adults I work with. And, you know, it's important to say I'm an adult psychotherapist as well as working with children and adolescents. And even in that work is that, especially in our Western society, we really do relegate play to the realm of childhood. And what that means for each of us having grown up is going to be different. You know, when were we told enough of that silliness now and grow up? And when were we big kidded? You're a grown up now, you're a big kid, none of that. And that's going to be different for each of us, the age we were. And are we okay with that? And just because we did play as children, it might be quite a while since we flexed our play muscles, you know, and we need to think back to our own play histories, you know, and how was our play celebrated, encouraged, or not with us as children. And I think it's really important to know that, because sometimes people say, I'm not very playful. And I'm always curious about that, because I think actually we all have the capacity to be playful, but it depends very much on how we currently define and understand play. And
Yeah.
if it's as a box of toys in the corner of a room or spread all over the floor of a room, then yes, that's one type of play. And those toys, they're not play, by the way. They're props that enhance or enable play, but play is relational. Like
Yeah.
play is a relational activity. It fuels connection.
Mhm.
And, you know, I think we can lose sight of that, that lots of people, if you, for example, are like, well, I don't play, but I'd never miss a day of the crossword, or I do Wordle every day without fail, or Sudoku's my thing. You play. It's intellectual play, but you play. And I think we have to give ourselves permission to get to know our play tendencies and patterns. And
Mhm.
then, yeah, challenge ourselves a little, not a lot, but a little out of our comfort zone to say, could I? And I'm not suggesting people become Blue Peter, you know, children's entertainer presenters overnight and go, well, that's my worst nightmare. So don't start there. Like the amount of people who go, well, I would hate this. And I'm going, do not go to the path of greatest resistance as your starting point. You
Yeah.
wouldn't do that
Yeah.
in any other aspect of life. Don't do it here. What could you do? Start there and grow the experience from that point onwards. And
Mm.
I think this modality really enables people to do that. But I would see that evidence throughout all of the work that I do
Okay.
in terms of, be it psychotherapy, be it more talk-based therapy, that even in speaking, we can create a playful exchange. And, you know, we can play with language. I always think we underestimate the playfulness of language and
Yeah.
how inherently part of culture language is, be it poetry or song or rhythmic patterns in speech or phonemes. Children do this beautifully, you know, before they speak, they play with sound that has
Yeah.
meaning. They do their uh-ohs, oops, and these are sound with meaning. So they
Yeah.
do this kind of lovely phoneme thing, and we play with them and we use a very expressive face when we're doing
Mhm.
it. So actually, I think we're way more playful and engaged in way more play than we give ourselves credit for, because of how we've come to define play as a particular type of interaction, when it's so much more flexible than that.
Yeah. And why do you think it's important for adults to play still?
I think it's important for us to play the whole way through the trajectory of
Forever.
our life. I don't
Forever.
think it's ever going to not be important, because you know, I think play is a neural exercise. I think it's a relational activity, and I think it fuels connection. And I mean that in a very holistic sense. You know, it fuels that connection we have to ourselves, within ourselves, in relation to other people around us, and within the environment, the ever-changing environments we find ourselves in. And we saw this really come into sharp focus during the COVID pandemic
Mm.
period, particularly initial, very restrictive lockdowns, where the more playful minded people
Mhm.
adapted quicker to the changing landscape and were able to do that. Okay, but I wonder if, and how about we, and why don't we try? If you're in that curious state of mind, you're in a playful state of mind, and people who can get there quickly will adapt very quickly to changing environments. And some people are not quick to get there. But maybe you found yourself doing things, you know, that you hadn't done in a long time. Maybe
Mhm.
you were YouTube teaching yourself how to play the piano because you used to play
Yes.
it as a child, or you were taking, you know, doing, I almost dread saying it, but the old Zoom quizzes, which were so much fun at the beginning and then became, oh my God, don't mention that.
Not another
Um,
one. Yeah.
or baking banana bread, all those.
Everybody.
Who
I
knew
love
there were so many
banana
ways
bread.
to bake banana bread, or grow sourdough
Is it
starter, or become an
the
amateur
sourdough
barista?
Yeah,
it's the
absolutely.
15-step sourdough recipes and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
So, but I mean, all of that was play. That was people saying, I need something to get me through this. I need a way of shaping my environment to enable this. And that's play. And
Yeah.
I think, you know, we forget that. And I think play has such a role in work environments. I think if you've
Oh,
got
yeah.
playfulness on your team, you've got curious, creative minded people who are coming up with new ways, innovative ideas, and good collaborative work experiences. I think it keeps people healthier and happier because they're having this kind of dose of laughter is such an
Yeah.
underestimated mental wellness thing. I know companies love to talk about well-being, but doing well-being as a
Mm.
regular daily practice is something else. And it's bigger than, you know, focusing on we'll have yoga in the morning and we'll have this, and that's lovely, and that's all a part of it. But it can also be making sure that we are a playful team and we are
Yeah.
creative and we work together. So I actually think, people taking play breaks can unstick them. When we all have this. So yeah, I'm going to say when, not if, but when you feel that sense of stuckness, you just feel a bit ugh, and stuck. That's usually, for me, that's a sign that I've forgotten to play. I've neglected play, and I need to stop what I'm doing, separate myself from the field of action, whatever it might be at the time, and I need to play.
Yeah.
And I mean, for me, that would be things like having a little freezer bag in my desk drawer of a handful of Lego blocks and a party bag size of bubbles. We talk about, breathing and getting into, I mean, if you're in the history of being stressed, when someone says, take a deep breath and calm
Yeah.
down, that's because words don't land on us in that.
Yeah.
If you get some bubbles and you take a breath in through your nose and you exhale through your mouth and blow, you're breathing.
Yeah.
And you're doing deep belly breathing, but you're blowing bubbles. So your focus is on the bubbles, and then you might pop them, and then you might, I know it sounds like, oh, I don't know, Joanna. But
I'm just imagining like sitting at work and like just blowing bubbles, and then like
do you know what's going to happen, Sandra? Someone's going to come over and start popping them as you blow them. They'll initially go, what is she doing? And then they won't be able to stop themselves. They'll come over and go pop, 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 and start popping them. But again, it's like that's one way of doing it. There are other ways that we do play breaks at work, but I feel a playful workspace is a very productive workspace. So far be it from looking like people are, on the DOS, or, they're not taking work seriously. I would see it in the opposite way. Actually, it's going to enable a more productive, creative, enhanced work team experience by giving opportunities for play. But it also has roles in our relationships with each other, and not just intimate partner relationships, but also intimate partner relationships. But with all, be you the adult child of an aging parent, or the parent of an older child yourself now, or your sibling relationships, your friendships, finding your play people, finding the people that you can be playful with. Do you know what? Even just sitting on the bus, wherever you're going, and not taking your phone out, and being available for eye contact and hello and great weather today, and yes, and did you see this, and goodness, isn't this a lot, and having an exchange is a form of connection. And we lose a lot of that by shutting ourselves off into our own worlds quite a lot.
Or if you think about organizations as well, as you were saying, to loosen it up a little bit and to have almost permission to be more playful, and that feels more organic. And I think we're not naturally designed to maybe be so serious. And the work that we do, I suppose, in mental health, is a lot of it is very heavy and feels like a very heavy role to be in at times. So I'm just thinking that bit of space to have that connection and to have that bit of fun, whether you're observing it or part of it, you can't help but connect to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, you can surprise yourself by just saying, well, I've never done that before, but now you don't get to say that. And there are way more discreet things. Anyone going, oh, I can't do that. Don't think you can't play at your desk, because if you simply take out a piece of paper and put your pen into your non-dominant hand, for me, that would be my left hand, and place it on the page and close my eyes and just count 15 down to 1 and make a mark on the page like a big scribble. And then when I open my eyes, turn the page 180 degrees, put my pen back in my dominant hand, and maybe I set myself a timer. It depends. I just putting in features into that scribble to create order from the disorder, and it's a really good way of just having that play break, getting my brain into a creative, solution focused, critical thinking kind of space. And then you just put the page away when you're done. But that's probably taken you 5 minutes. And everybody has 5 minutes in their day that they could do that. But that's really about giving back to yourself and saying, I deserve to play. It's not I need to play, but I deserve to play. And I think it's going to open us up to more opportunities. Then you go in pursuit of play, and opportunities to see things and go, ooh, look at that, and wait till I tell somebody about that. And I think that's something that we should do as much of as we possibly can.
There's definitely, like, like as you're saying that, like, just kind of just scribble and then like color it in or like make some order. Like the amount of times that like, you like in the middle of like the workday, you get out your phone and you like start scrolling,
Absolutely.
and it's like you feel there's a feeling of like, you'd be better doing something that like just
Yeah.
isn't, it kind of makes you
You
feel
totally
worse,
would.
like,
You really would be better because it's actually, engaging your brain in a very
Mhm.
different way. And we
yeah,
already are in receipt of so much
yeah,
information.
yeah.
And it's actually about taking space to make meaning of what we're experiencing and what we're taking in, and being able to say, I need a break from that and I need to engage my brain in a different way. And not just our brains, but our bodies as well, being
Mm.
really aware of how often we sit in particular postures and how that might feel for us, and what would it be like to change that, even for a few minutes, just
Yeah.
to move differently around a space for a few minutes, and just to bring that more mindful awareness to yourself. I always think of it like taking a compassion pause. Like, in my busy day, have I brought awareness to what's going on in my cognitive space? Am I thinking? What's the kind of words running around in my head? Have I done that to my emotional self? What am I feeling? And to my physical self, where am I holding all of that in my body? And
Mhm.
even just taking, that's a 1 minute thing,
Mhm.
doing that at the start of your day, during your day, at the end of your day, you're just bringing that bit of, oh, hang on, I need to check in with myself. And I owe that to myself to see. Otherwise, we end up, and I think those of us in the mental health profession are particularly susceptible to this. I was going to say guilty of this, but that's a negative word. So we're susceptible to this, is that we'll save up all of our stress and pressure, and we'll wait for that 3-week holiday that we've booked in the summer. And we'll spend the first week sick, and the
Yeah.
second week on holiday, and the third week negatively anticipating coming back to all the emails and all the things we're going to have to do and
Yeah.
everything that's piled up on our desk. And that's no kind of break at all. You would have been better taking 15 minutes every single day and playing at your desk
Yeah.
than waiting for that. Because at least if you're taking your leave in that way, enjoy it. Make
Yeah.
sure you protect it, ring fence it, and say, I'm not allowing my stress to contaminate that. That's my time. So what do
Mhm.
I need to put in place? I think therapeutic self-care is something that we probably all talked about in college and in training, and we go, oh yes, and we may even have designed ourselves a lovely self-care plan, but it's probably sitting at the back of a drawer somewhere, and we've never looked at it since, because it's often the first thing to go. But if
Mhm.
you are doing more small moments that bring greater awareness to yourself, you'll spot those signs and you'll say, I need to do something about this. And
Yeah.
it won't build up, because even just taking a moment to check in with yourself, like a compassion pause, and you're saying, it isn't good up here. I'm actually got quite the negative refrain and I'm quite stiff in my body and I'm feeling quite low affect, actually. Now I have a choice. Do I just go, what you going to do, and move on? Or do I
Mhm.
say, felt like that yesterday too, and the day before. That's now a pattern. I owe it to myself to do better by me, and
Yeah.
I'm going to do something. So I think the pockets of play are a great investment in ourselves, because it'll help us spot when things are, and when you forget to play, that's when things
Mm.
get stuck.
You can notice it. And
Yeah.
I think it's such a nice concept as well, the pockets of play and small play, because then when you do have that longer break, it's probably a lot easier to transition into a more playful space because, you're like, oh, I have this practice of play.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I can just pick it up a bit more easily, rather than having
Exactly.
to think, what do I do now to relax and feel connected and
Yeah.
spend time having to figure that out?
Yeah, and sometimes for some of us, it's nice. Well, you maybe can't do this all the time. So have your desk play, whatever it looks like for you. But, to book a play session during the week, and that might be your lunch hour, and it might be as simple as you go to the art museum. And I love to do this when I walk around an art museum. I imagine I have a limitless budget and obviously massive walls to hang everything on. And I walk around, and in every room, what would I buy in here? Where would I hang it? And why? And I do the whole imaginary art
Great.
fire thing. And I love doing that. But you might want to book, a trampolining session. You might want to book a wall climbing session. Sometimes people find, actually, I'm going to play if I put much more structure into it and I book something and it's at a certain time and there's a clear beginning and end. Or you may or may not want to bring a play partner with you for that, someone that, you know, has a shared interest or that you
Mhm.
will connect with. So we'll all find different ways of doing it. The point is there is always a way of getting more playfulness into our lives. No matter what way it works, there is always a way of becoming more playful.
Yeah. And it's definitely a practice, I think, that it could be so easy, but then you do kind of have to work at it a little bit. I was thinking about a time that I booked myself and a friend into an inflatable zone
Fabulous.
for fun. But then we got there and everybody who was there was, I'd say, 10 and under. So we just got overwhelmed and ended up leaving. I was like, I can't go in here. So working up to it, I can see the benefits of the play
Yeah.
part, but also having these discussions where we give ourselves permission to play
Yeah.
breaks or reading why we play and
Yeah.
thinking, okay, actually, this is important for me
Yeah.
as an adult. It's not just for kids, and the
Yeah.
reasons why it's important and how it can help us.
It's also going to enhance our work, whether you work with children or not,
Yeah.
you work with people.
Yeah.
And, you know, that more playful state of mind, it helps us to attune to where somebody else is at and to pick up on those kind of micro cues that we could otherwise miss, because it just helps us to stay engaged and connected. And I think that's really helpful too. But, you know, if you are working with children, or if you happen to be a parent or simply have children in your life, be they friends, children, or nieces or nephews, you know, this is something that they will really appreciate. They'll spot it in you and
Mhm.
they will give you tons of opportunity to
Yeah.
flex your play muscles. And play is their language. Play is how children tell us what
Mm.
is and isn't working for them. It is how they communicate. And we could take a lot from children and learn a lot. And I always think that in my work. You know, I feel over the 25 years or so I'm working in psychotherapy, didn't want to say that number, but is that I've gotten way more out of the work than I could ever possibly have given, because my own practice and way of viewing the world has been strengthened and enhanced and is a constant evolving thing, you know,
Yeah.
where I learn so much. I've long since given up from that phrase of, you know, I've seen it all now, because as soon as you think that, in walks something to go,
Something
no, you
new.
haven't. Not this way. So, you know, being open to being surprised relies on a playful state of mind. And I just think that's a survival technique in our work. Stay open to being surprised and sometimes outright shocked, but definitely surprised.
Hmm. And I think maybe you're just talking there about learning so much, but then you also give so much back because you do have a public, like you have social media and you
Mm,
share obviously with the
yeah.
public about all of these thoughts, and it's parenting and play and incorporating all of that. And one of the things we wanted to talk to you about was just, becoming somebody who represents, the profession in this public way.
Mm,
What
mm.
is that like for you? How did you go down that road?
Do you know, I don't really know in lots of ways, but when I started working for myself,
Mhm.
and, you know, I would get some invitations to contribute a comment for an article a journalist was writing, a quote, to maybe come on to something, you know, if on social media I expressed an opinion or a thought about
Mhm.
something topical in the media, and somebody said in radio, will you come on and talk about that? I just decided to start saying yes, and to not think about that, but just say yes. Yes, I will. And it really grew from there. And being very aware that I'm only talking about things that I know about.
Mm.
I'm not talking about things where I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to do a bit of research, but that I'm not, because it would sound very rehearsed for
Yeah.
me, and that doesn't work for me. So I would say, as much as I say yes, I say no. I say no to things, especially now where I'm like, no, there are people who know far more about that than I do. And I may give them names or suggestions or say, it's not for me. That doesn't fit with where I'm at right now. But I would say yes. And I would encourage people to say yes because
Mhm.
don't forget, you know, radio producers are looking to fill a lot of airtime. And they're looking for people who have something to say and
Mm.
have something to contribute, and will give you the space to do that. So I think, you know, have a think about even if it feels, and it will feel a little uncomfortable anyway at the beginning, but do it once. And if you're like, well, that was horrific, do it a second time just to make sure it's still horrific and that wasn't a one-off. And if it's not for you, say, well, I did it and I now
Yeah.
know it's not for me, rather than thinking, but it might be for you. And, you know, I like doing that aspect of the work. I like being able to communicate with
Mhm.
a larger group of people than I could possibly see in a
Yes.
clinical setting. And also, and this is part of the premise of 15-minute parenting for me, the whole series of books, was there is a huge cohort of parents who do not need to present in clinic.
Mhm. Yeah.
And for whom a small change would make a big difference.
Yeah.
And with access to play and insights and information, can do a lot themselves at home and can lead that. And I see a lot of the work I do in the media as fitting within that remit, that this is about sharing thoughts and ideas and practical and creative play solutions to explore at home. And there
Yeah.
will still be people who need to have a clinical intervention or would benefit from presenting it with a clinician. And, you know, I think it's important to know the difference around all of that. But I think everybody will benefit from understanding play and playful parenting a bit more. So I like to do it from that point of view.
Mhm. Sounds like you encourage people to say yes.
Say yes. That's literally it. Because do you know what? If you say no and you say no and you say no a third time, they stop asking you
Yeah.
because they will believe you and say, well, your answer is no. So, you know, do say yes more often than you don't. And, you know, be very clear about what it is you want to say and don't be led by somebody else into, well, I got to
Mhm.
say yes and talk about this. If it's not your thing, then don't
Yeah.
do that to yourself.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate. I always think with media, we tend to think of really big media broadcasters and platforms. I would encourage everybody to make sure your local regional radio station and newspaper or free newspaper publication in your community, be sure they know about you and what you do and what you're aware of and what you can say, because that's a
Yeah.
great space to start. And I really believe in community media and
Mhm.
growing community media. I think they're a really underutilized resource, but a very powerful resource.
Yeah.
Like, so like there's the books, there's the media, the private practice and stuff like that. Is it can it be difficult to kind of manage all of that together, or is it difficult to kind of strike a balance with everything?
I mean, yes. It is different. It is difficult. And it's a lot of hats. I think the variety suits me as well because
Mm.
it allows me to be in one space or another, but I don't have, as I'd call higgledy-piggledy days. I do have structure that works for me where I know I'm in a very clinical space on a couple of days, and actually I'm doing other work on other days and whatever it might be. And I would tend to, you know, balance my own clinical schedule with direct client work and supervision work as
Mhm.
well, because I like to do that. But I think I'm also at a stage in my practice, in my business, and business is a good word when you work for yourself. You know, I also did a diploma in business management along the way.
Mm.
It was something that was I'm so grateful that I did it. I mean, it was very much out of my comfort zone, but I was very top heavy on mental health and
Yeah.
psychological world trainings. And this allowed me to kind of see there is a structure, there is a rhythm, there is a
Mhm.
way that we've got to operate when you work for yourself, because that's what you are, but you are your business. It's not like I
Yes.
have a product that I'm selling, it's me.
Mm.
So I've got to take care of that as well and look at, well, do a case audit. Like, am I very top heavy on very high trauma cases, or, you know, I'm making sure that I'm managing my workload. And for me, the variety gives me that bit of, okay, this is a different rhythm of day to this day to this day. And that helps to keep me in sync. So it is difficult, but because I think I needed to find it really difficult to look at solutions to that difficulty. So I didn't hit the ground running saying, well, here's the perfectly formulated business structure. And I still think there are many, many months ago, I work part-time. But then I have to say, no, you don't, Joanna. No, you don't. And I mean, I think that's my aspiration. I would like to work less, and that's what I'm striving towards. I got very busy and I sort of fell into that, the work setting my rhythm instead of me setting the rhythm. And that's usually when I get that sign of, I need to step back. I need to get some space, get some perspective, and come at this in a different way. I think we all would benefit from that.
Yeah. I think that's really insightful. I think it's very helpful, obviously, for me to hear that. I'm sure lots of people will be happy to hear that and take that. I know we don't want to keep you for too long. We've taken so much of your time, and yet I think we could talk to you for ages. Like, you just have so much knowledge and wisdom. I just love talking to you. So I guess just as a final question, what are you, I know you're not half busy at all. So
all this time on my hands.
So much free time. So what are you, is there a new project coming up, or what are you most looking forward to over the next like 6 or 12 months? Is anything else coming up?
So, I mean, I have something kind of percolating, and this is what happens. I like to take, I said no more books. But I said that after every book. Okay. So I said I wouldn't write a book this year, and I'm sticking to that. Okay. And I finished my doctorate, and that was something that I was really passionate about as well. And so I wanted to take this year to enjoy those milestones actually, and I've done pretty well with that. And I'm taking more time and little short holidays and trips. But I do think, and I always think there might be something else. I think we all have a book in us, and I do think there might be something else to talk about in that regard. And I want to get back to the podcast. So those are the bits that because I took a small break from that with a mountain of commitments. But I do think that those are things that are my play space. They allow me to think and talk and share and be creative. So I want to go back to investing in that. And I think that would be great.
That sounds great. That's lovely. I think when you've had time to rest and then you find what's drawing you back.
Exactly. Rest is good, but I'm also aware it's not my natural space. I have to work hard to get there. I probably am more comfortable with that more frenetic pacing. That's not a humble brag, because I don't think that's necessarily a good thing over time. But I think having those pockets of rest and play and finding that you really do enjoy it can be a surprise, but a gift to your nervous system as well. But I think out of that comes new ideas. And that's what I'm finding. So there are some new ideas bubbling and percolating, and I'm interested to explore those in the next year.
Amazing. That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's been so lovely. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.